Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight?
Great.
Great, yay. I'm Mike Cooper. I'm the president of Central Oregon Writers Guild. I'm going to go over some of the events that we have coming up. Then we'll have our featured reader, and then we'll have our presenter this evening. Okay, so welcome everyone. I know this happened. I have to be really still. So this is the landing page of the Central Oregon Writers Guild website. On the left side, we have all of the Central Oregon Writers Guild events. So there's beautiful Ellie Waterston, who is speaking tonight. Ellie is also doing a workshop on Saturday, which is this close to sold out. So if you're interested, jump on that as quick as possible. April, we have Joe Ide coming in to talk about how to write the killer crime novel, how to get up your odds of getting published. May, we have Kim Johnson, who is an instructor at the Oregon State University Cascades MFA program, who's going to talk about incorporating real-world issues into fiction. These are our speakers. And then Bola Gabadabo, a local film producer, is going to do a haiku workshop in May. So that's going to be super fun. I sat and talked with her about that a couple of weeks ago, and I'm super excited about that. That's going to be on Saturday, May 17th, and that's so the workshops are $10 for Writers Guild members, $25 for non-members. The meetings are obviously free. So this one is a workshop. June, we've got Laura Stanfield, who just published a book called Imagine a Door about the craft of writing. She's going to talk to us at the June meeting, and then she's going to do a workshop also in June. More stuff happening. Meg Fancher is going to talk to us in July. More and more stuff happening. I think we've got 6 workshops this year. Usually we only have 4, but we've got 6 because workshops are cool. So on the right side, we have everything that we know of that's happening in the writing world in Central Oregon. Okay, there's a couple of things that I have yet to add. In April, April's Poetry Month, and COCC is going to do some really cool stuff. 3 or 4. Are you at COCC in April? Also, yeah. So they're going to do some kind of cool stuff in April, which I just got an email about today, which I'll add on there. So these are workshops, author readings. We have writing salons. We have poetry readings. We have spoken word nights. All kinds of stuff. Highly encourage you to engage in those activities. Part of writing, I think, and Ellen made it speak to this, is being in a writing community, which you all are right now in this room, which is a fantastic thing. And I think that I was just talking with somebody the other day. Writing is no matter how collaborative we believe we are, when we're writing, we're alone. And so talking about your writing, sharing your writing, going and hearing other people talk about writing, listening to reading, all that sort of stuff, going to workshops, this is how we create community, and this is how you get just better at your craft and are able to share what you know, right? So all rising tide floats all boats. Okay. I know that a couple people had some things that they wanted to talk about, upcoming events. I know that Sheila does. You want to stand up and tell us what you got going?
All right, thank you.
All right.
My name's Sheila, and I wanted to just tell you about writing retreats. I am co-founder of the Stepping Stone Writing Retreats, and I put a bunch of these on the table back there if anyone's interested. We've done 2 of them so far, and the next one is in April in Lincoln City on the coast. And the retreats are led by 2 local authors and educators out of Portland, Joanna Rose and Brian Benson, and I have studied with both, and they're fantastic. They teach at the Attic Institute, if any of you heard that in Portland, and other places, and they're published authors themselves. What we do that's a little different, I think, from some other programs is the retreat is focused on your projects. So there's a lot of dedicated free writing time, and then there's a critique, a table critique in the afternoon, and there's also one-on-one consultations with either Joanne or Brian. So it's really terrific. I got a huge amount done at the last one, and the upcoming one is April 25th, and there's information in the back. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
I know that there are at least 2 people in this room who have recently published a book. You want to tell us about it?
Oh. Hi, my name is Jeffrey James Reckman. I just released Christmas, my first Christian fiction novel entitled Heavenward, the Unholy Summons. And it'll make you cry, it'll make you laugh, but one thing you'll do, you'll be on the edge of your seat through the whole story. So I hope you can find it in most of the local bookstores now, and Barnes and Noble, of course on Amazon. So I just joined recently COWG and look forward to being a participating member. And I'm glad to be here.
Congratulations.
I'm Karen Zacharias, and I have a new travel memoir out. Following the pandemic, I spent 6 months in Scotland doing a master's program with a friend from Chicago. And so we did this travel memoir. It's about adventures we took and the people we met, and it also deals with the racial issue because she's Black, right? So kind of how you cross that racial barrier to build a friendship at this age.
Anybody else have announcements? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to introduce our featured reader coordinator who just got a snazzy new haircut. Mary Krakow is going to introduce our featured reader for the evening.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
The new haircut. But before I introduce our reader, I am the featured reader coordinator, and the end of last year, I had people sign up to be the featured reader for the whole year, and I have 2 openings, April and July. So I don't know if I should pass this around or set it on the snack table. I think I'll set it on the snack table. I do need somebody for next month, so hopefully somebody will jump up and put their name there. Read for about 5 minutes, maybe up to 8 minutes. And it's a good opportunity, like Mike said, to share with your writing community what you've been working on. So I'll put that on the snack table. Tonight's featured reader is Danica Gary. She moved to Central Oregon nearly 2 years ago with her boyfriend and cat, Willow. She used to perform in slam poetry competitions and has always been a sucker for art that ridicules the status quo. One of her short stories was recently published in a literary journal, and she is so thankful to have a great circle of fellow writers to help her in achieving her writing goals. For her current project, she has decided to step out of her comfort zone, poetry and short stories, to work on a dystopian novel. And she is in my critique group, and I've had a chance to read some of her dystopian novel, and it's awesome. So please welcome Danica Gary.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm not going to be reading anything from my dystopian novel, but I do have some poetry to read tonight. All right, so this first one here, I got published when I was in college. It's called Wars Leave Fatherless Sons. Barbed wires don't damage their skin, and clouded air doesn't restrict their lungs. For what they feel isn't the thinning of their bodies or the drying surface of their tongues, it's the absence of a father's love. A boy's finger wraps around the wire, begging it to dig deeper, to explore the pains of his soul and patch up the holes of his misplaced trust. How do boys create a sense of self if there are no cute girls to blush, no desires full of lust, no fun secrets to hush, no adults left to trust, and no fathers left to love? For in the battle of a baseball game, or basketball, or football, a boy claims his father's love. But how does a boy claim his father's love when the war has forced him to watch from above? I have a couple other short ones as well. So this one's more just flash fiction than poetry. It's called A Laugh in a Bar. The laugh from the burly man with the Bud Light can in his hand is boisterous. The awkward giggle from the shy girl on her first date is innocent. The howls that come from the pool table after the 8-ball is pocketed are obnoxious. The snicker from the bourbon-loving woman in front of the slot machine is pitiful. To some, laughter is camaraderie. To others, laughter is a distraction. Yet as I witness those around me, I can't help but think, laughter is a lifeline. All right, back to poetry. This one's called The Sun. Window shades prolong my inevitable waking. Sheets cover my desires to start anew. But if the day isn't mine for the taking, then what is there to pursue? The rising sun brings forth caprices, but only to those who wake with purpose. My soul will continue to disease until I stop asking, what have I done to deserve this? One day I'll learn to smile at the sunrise, even in my most melancholy of states, until I get out of my selfish demises and tell myself I refuse to sit around and wait. And I'll end on this last poem here. It's called The Buzz of the Bee. There's only the buzz of the bee in the quiet town far away from the city. Children play impatiently in the dirt, and adults skirt around the edges of the home. Writing manifests in the echoes of the train, and paintings come alive in the rain-filled dreary. Love blossoms on the porch swing, and hate lingers on the lips of estranged lovers. Speak, cries the sounds of the city. Listen, cries the silence of the town.
Nice job, Danica. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, our speaker tonight is Ellen Waterston, who I've known for a while now. Got to spend 4 days on the Snake River with you last summer. We had a lovely time, did a lot of writing and reading and so on.
Mind you, it was a group.
We ignored the group. Yeah, you didn't have to tell. Ellen Waterston is an award-winning poet and author, and has dedicated herself to writing and advocating for the literary arts in the high desert region of Oregon, all the while continuing to write poetry and nonfiction works that have evolved into essential reading about Oregon and the West. She's published 4 poetry and 4 literary nonfiction titles, including most recently We Could Die Doing This, 2024, and Walking the High Desert, 2020. She's founder of the Writing Ranch and the annual Waterston Desert Writing Prize. 2024 was a banner year for Ellie, who this past year, received the Soapstone's Bread and Roses Award, Stuart H. Holbrook Award, and was named the 11th Poet Laureate for Oregon. For more information, check her out at www.writingranch.com. And let's.
I know you had a couple.
I have a lot of things.
Oh. And Mike, what's the magic amount of time?
So 7 o'clock is witching hour, but if you want to stop early and ask questions and
Yeah.
we'll eat and drink and all that sort of stuff. So
Merit. Yeah. No, don't do that though.
that one doesn't work.
Okay. Great. This is wonderful. I don't even have to say it. The light goes on, the water appears. So thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Boy, yeah, that was a great week, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. And good evening, one and all. What a pleasure to be here with all of you. In my town, I've been a road warrior, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But I thought what I'd do, just to prepare you, is I'd read a short excerpt from my just released collection of essays. We could die doing this, but not before some new and favorite poems of mine and others that I'd like to share. And then after these remarks, I'll be happy to take questions about what it's like on the road as ditch rider, given the title of this evening's presentation. My idea behind that moniker was to make sure that all irrigation ditches are full to overflowing with poems, with words, to nourish the meadows and minds of Oregonians as I travel. And really on these long, long stretches of road, I do feel a bit like a ditch rider, or lines woman. Somehow lines men sounds slightly more romantic. Remind me to comment also at the end on a couple of projects I'm hoping to gain traction on with, and I'd love your input on it. So speaking of poems, poet laureate, I mean, really, I'm so grateful to Governor Tina Kotek for this honor and for recognizing the vibrant literary community on this side of the Cascades. The response to the appointment and the requests for appearances east of the Cascades is astounding. The appetite is enormous. And I also want to thank the Oregon Cultural Trust. They handle the money part of this position, Oregon Humanities, who administers it, and the many agencies, organizations, and individuals that makes this important statewide program possible. And probably the individuals will be the only one with any funding left in about a month. So those of you who've heard me present before probably can recite this next little paragraph by memory, but I love to say it. I love to invoke my father, who used to say, if you paddle in milk long enough, it turns to cream. As a high desert poet and writer, I've been proselytizing poetry and preaching prose in Oregon's long outback a very, very long time. The work itself is its own reward, but I have to say this opportunity, everything just got a lot creamier. I'm honored to be serving Oregon in this way. And 6 months in already, I can hardly believe it. It's a 2-year appointment. And over the next 2 years, I'll travel the state, sharing my love of poetry, of place, the written word, with Oregon's diverse audiences, younger and elder. Why the emphasis on elder? Should be obvious. I am one. And I'll encourage my contemporaries to join in and along with younger voices to make their creative case on the page. And that's what I want to talk to you about later on, how we're going to do that. The high desert is my muse, evident in much of what I write, including in this first poem. It's one I read at the Oregon Senate organizational session in January. It chronicles my drive to southeastern Oregon on the night of the presidential election, where I was scheduled to meet with a ranching couple the next day as part of an ongoing interview project that now going into its 3rd year that I do for the Oregon Desert Land Trust. Interviewing residents of southeastern Oregon, the theme, the sort of connective tissue being how it's possible to love the same thing differently, so differently, and how to share those perspectives. The endangered Lahontan cutthroat trout is referenced in this poem, and it resides in streams high in the Trout Creek Mountains on Oregon's southern border. How many of you know the Trout Creeks or the Pueblo Mountains at all? Good job. Yay. Two out of it's a part of this beautiful, beautiful state that is as staggering as the rest of the beautiful, beautiful parts of the state as a whole. So I encourage you to take a trip, get an ice cream soda at Fields, and explore those beautiful mountains. Here's that poem. It's titled Static. A remote highway in southeastern Oregon, late on a moonless November night. Here and there, my headlights might illuminate a reflective sign. Wildlife, refuge, wilderness area. That's about it. I tune in for news of my nation's fate, but only get static. Who's winning, I wonder? The road ahead looks dark and empty. But just then, out of the pitch, what is it? A mysterious, single, bobbing beam coming at me, too high, too slow for anything I can name. I tell myself, be thankful for any emissary of light. Closing in, it turns out my redeemer's a solo cowboy at a trot, headlamp secured above his brim, raffle and lasso strapped to the saddle horn. Maybe looking for strays, putting venison in the freezer, returning home after a visit with a far-flung neighbor. Does he wonder who's winning? I tune in for news of our country's fate, but only get static. Driving the next day, I ponder the dwindling Lahontan cutthroat, take pleasure in the skulking coyote, the golden rabbit brush, the Angus grazing in the meadows, the snow-dusted pueblos. I tune in for news of our shared habitat's fate, but only get static. Finally, I'm there. The sign on the gate says, "Their pit bulls don't take kindly to liberals." I knock anyway and go in only to find lapdogs and common cause with the land we love in common. There's no discussion of winners, of losers, only doers in the race to conserve the grand scheme of all things wild and working. We turn off the static. Reading static at the Senate session and later that day, providing the invocation prior to the State of the State address by Governor Kotek are but two of the many unexpected and extraordinary poet laureate occasions I've been honored to participate in. Another was Portland's Cascadia composers putting music to the following poem at their November 2024 concert. And I wanted to get something that was sort of moody. I was late to the party. They had been working with former Poets Laureate for months and months with their composers and singers who are part of that organization. My appointment came along, albeit late, and so they patched me in, which meant I got to read my poem to the accompaniment of a guitarist and a French horn player. So I figured it should be sort of moody. So this is a moody piece. We're a long way from the autumn now, but there you have it. This is titled Sack of Birds. They say when lost in the woods, stay put. So I haven't moved in decades. But I have mapped my small encampment at the base of this tree and every night gazed overhead, taken inventory of the brilliant fiery arc of meteors. As to all those evergreens, I thought trees claim beauty from root and soil, but beauty like love is homeless. At the very least, I've come to know this, and that the forest is for the tree. What if I left and things fell apart? Would I hear them fall? My thin shoulder leans daily into difficult questions of earth and sky. Today I will take heart in hand. There's reason to do so. They say the membrane between the living and the dead is thin in October. It's my chance to cross over. But listen, is that the bark of a bloodhound? Sound of a search plane? If I have my bearings right, not far away, folks carry on up and down the river of their allotted time here. They'll be closing up their summer cabins, locking shutters, hanging bunk mattresses from the rafters to discourage rodents. They'll discard the sourdough starter, break open the extra flour sack filled with birds that will flutter into the dusk, puncture soft holes in the night, let starlight through, like pinlights, like lovers making love to love. It's cold here. All the razzmatazz aside, for me, honestly, the most exciting aspect of this appointment is the opportunity to teach in Oregon schools, libraries, community centers, churches, fairgrounds, you name it. I will be part of the Crooked River Roundup in Prineville. I'm threatening to find a horse that won't bug me off. I'm a rider, but hey, I want to carry a big flag. I want to be the oldest rodeo queen in the parade. And I want to carry a flag that says poetry. When I teach writing workshops, I generally offer an idea, a nudge, or prompt. This is nothing new to any of you. What happens next, as you all know, from your own experience, is alchemy, right? It's a form of magic that requires pen and paper. How cool is that? And a certain courage. What is the story each of us came to tell with our lives? What are the people, places, and events that inform that story? So this third grader in Paulina, Oregon is well on her way to learning about who she is by writing about place. I come from a fish, scales sleek as a feather. I come from a month of joyfulness where the sun sets and rises. I come from a dusty valley with gates made with solid wood. I come from a ranch where horses stir up the ground. Or this poem from a young cadet and candidate for a high school diploma enrolled at the Oregon National Guard Youth Challenge program east of town here off of Highway 20. In this group, they would stand and say, "Do I have permission to speak, ma'am?" This is in the workshop or even in the talk with each larger platoon group, 2 male, 1 female platoon. They're out there currently. Yes, ma'am, yes. Ma'am, would you be able to help me write a love poem? This is not that poem. This is a very different poem. Same prompt as the Paulina third grader. I come from a black pot of ink, a well of darkness, greed, and cruelty. I've drowned 1,000 times, but not today. Today, I spill the ink upon the page and turn shadows into light. Or this excerpt from a woman of a certain age in a recent workshop. C, S-E-A, C, tell me, are you coming in or going out so I can know where to put my feet? So who knows, maybe tomorrow or the next day, you will all take a moment to sit down and write a line or two to the prompt, I come from, or maybe to the prompt of where am I going, as is the case with where shall I put my feet? Or maybe instead you will write a poem about a pet, yours or someone else's, such as Oregon poet Gary Miranda wrote about his girlfriend's cat. He didn't much like cats, but he liked his girlfriend, so he did his best. By the way, are you all aware of Gary Miranda? We have a treasure in Gary Miranda in Central Oregon, a remarkable writer, a translator of Rilke, a prolific poet who taught at Reed for I don't know how many decades, at various universities back east, and he and his wife moved to Redmond to help care for grandchildren. He made a big impression and left a large legacy in the Portland literary community nationwide. And I really do hope that Central Oregon Writers Guild takes every advantage of this extraordinary individual and writer. So I want to share a poem by Gary Miranda about, he ultimately married the owner of the cat, so it was a good thing. It was kind to the cat. And if somebody can write this and do justice to Rilke, they've got my attention. This is titled Something Important. On my lap, a cat named Buick purrs, idling, as I idly stroke her haunches, a beautiful thing I note, though I don't like cats. I've never met a cat who didn't know something important I didn't know and wasn't about to tell me. And then there's that famed curiosity, not idle like ours, the need say to see who's next in line in the therapist waiting room, but rather the absurd assumption that the world has nothing better to do than hide cat surprises in out-of-the-way places. Cats are trees with their headlights on, I tell her, just so she'll know I know. She stirs, curious, then settles in again. Some beautiful things never learn their name. So that's the funny and playful side of Gary Miranda. I dearly hope you'll have the opportunity to hear more of his work. Or maybe instead you will write a fantasy poem, such as Oregon poet, author Joe Wilkins came up with when his sleepy young son asked for a bedtime story about when we were birds. Dad, tell me a story about when we were birds. Some of you have heard this. I love this stanza. It's the first stanza of the story he told him in the form of a poem. When we were birds, we veered and wheeled, we flapped and looped. It's true, we flew. When we were birds, we dined on tiny silver fish and the watery hearts of flowers. When we were birds, we sistered the dragonfly, brothered the nightwise bat, and sometimes when we were birds, we rose as high as we could go, light, cold, and strange. And when we opened our beaked mouths, sundown poured like wine down our throats. And it goes on beautifully from there. But maybe tomorrow or the next day, you'll take a moment and sit down and write a poem about when we were all birds or forests, fish, or humans being. Or maybe after shopping for groceries, you will go home and write a poem about a fruit or vegetable, a poem that does its job as a poem. Does its job that any writing is to do, changing forever our perception of its subject, as poet Joseph Hutchinson accomplishes in this one-line poem. It's one of my favorites. I reference it every time I teach a workshop, every time I give a talk. I have to mention that the subject of this poem was on sale at the market recently, so I bought a couple. And when checking out, I asked the weary-looking woman at the till if she liked poems. Some, she said, not looking up. I have one for you. And holding my purchase up in the air, I recited this. Artichoke, oh heart, weighed down by so many wings. She finished bagging my groceries, head down, saying nothing, printed out my receipt, handed it to me, and for the first time during our encounter, looked up and met my gaze. Thank you for the poem. Poetry freshens the world. It brings us alive, keeps us alive. We must always have a poem in our pocket, ready to share. Poems are ambassadors of love, connectedness, humanity, a call to open arms, and God knows we need this. Like starting some months ago. To that point of the power of poetry, Kim Stafford was one of the guest faculty, and Kip, sitting here in the third row back, was at their workshop this year. Was one of the guest faculty at this year's Writing Down the Baja that the Writing Ranch puts on. This was the 14th annual. We have the dates for the 15th. If you're interested, check it out. They're not on the website yet, so don't be too quick. But we have the dates. Among Kim Stafford's many, many accomplishments, he has written a poem for peace that has been translated into 40, 50 different languages and is making its way around the globe. He's an example of how big we must think. We need to think in bold letters right now. Writers have an important role to play in preventing the wheels from flying off everything we cherish about self, family, community, state, region, country, peace, love, and compassion, just for starters. This, as Jane Fonda said at the recent SAG Awards, is our documentary moment, our opportunity to show up for what matters most to us. So here's the English version of Kim Stafford's poem. A proclamation for peace. Whereas the world is a house on fire, whereas the nations are filled with shouting, whereas hope seems small, sometimes a single bird on a wire left by migration behind, whereas kindness is seldom in the news and peace an abstraction while war is real, whereas words are all I have, whereas my life is short, whereas I am afraid, whereas I am free despite spite, all fire and anger and fear. Be it therefore resolved, a song shall be my calling. A song not yet made shall be vocation and peaceful words, the work of my remaining days. I'm not sure that's the one I heard. It feels like there are a couple of stray words in there. We heard it a number of times while we were down in the Baja. I'll have to check it out, but you get the gist. So before I conclude with a final poem, I'd like to read an excerpt from this latest title of mine, published by the Source Media. It's a collection of essays, the accumulation of 3 years worth of writing columns for the Source Weekly. It's titled "We Could Die Doing This, Dispatches on Aging and Ageism from Oregon's Outback." As a poet who also writes prose, my aim is to incorporate the lyricism and elasticity of poetry into my long form writing. And I enjoy it, and I weirdly enjoy this column, as evident by doing it for 3 years and still going. So I thought this is the counter to the rather dreary poem about getting lost in the woods and staying put. How are we doing? You wouldn't tell me otherwise, it'd be too embarrassing. We've only lost one so far.
His granddaughter had a cello recital.
Oh, okay, goody.
Yeah.
That's good. I thought. Anyway, this one is titled "Ribbit." Go ahead, call me a batrachophile, a renidophile, You can have your crocus, your yellow blaze of forsythia and daffodil, or the exuberant conchlery song of the red-winged blackbird as it heralds its return north. For me, the real sign of spring is the sound of the peeper, the tiny paperclip-sized tree frog that nests all winter under leaves and underbrush next to ponds, wetlands, or man-made water features. Not only are these mighty mites able to live on land or in water, but during the winter, their tiny livers flush their bloodstream with what is essentially antifreeze, a chiroprotectant glucose, allowing them to slow their hearts to a state of dormancy until temps get back to a balmy 40 degrees. It's then the hooray begins. They hop out of hiding. A balloon of sound fills up their froggy chests, and the nighttime hullabaloo gets underway. Though its formal name is Pseudacris crucifer, another name for this cheery harbinger of spring is, no surprise, chorus frog. April is National Frog Month, in addition to a lot of other things. A tribute to frogs' reemergence in spring. Okay, a bit niche, but the peeper's din does serve to put us on notice that we have another spring to celebrate. New beginnings, new adventures. In the world of spirit animals, frogs represent transition, the successful progression from one stage of life to the next. And at my age, that's an interesting concept. But anyway, the capacity to move on from any situation. They come by this reputation honestly, given that their ancestors date back 250 million years. So they figured out this transition stuff. Most phases or transition periods humans experience as sequential, taking place in the progressive tense. Newborning, toddlering, adolescenting, adulting. These are all future forward names that imply certain expectations and structures. Young adult, find work and relationship. Midlife, skip the crisis and instead focus on growing a family, a business, a community. Go, go. Then there's retirement. It's what happens after midlife, post-middle age, before decrepitude. It's when we're supposed to pursue leisure until the end of life. It's a bit amorphous as a phase, lacking in definitive cultural or social expectations. And the never-ending fun model doesn't work for the vast majority of 65-year-olds who either prefer a different approach or can't afford to take off the work mantle, or both. In both cases, they're the richer for it. For if you're to believe reports on the benefits of staying engaged and on purpose, you understand why they're richer for it. The words retire, retiree, and retirement derive from the French retirer, meaning to withdraw or go away. Go away. In Europe, the common designation is pensioner, conjuring a social dependent who has ceased working, all take and no give. Words shape our reality. Retirement suggests backward motion. Believe it and you will see it. As long as we keep using the word retirement or even clever wordplay such as the new retirement or refiring or a bit more positive, starting older, a trace of withdrawal of endings is still in the air. Given our longer life expectancy, we need a new word for the 20 plus years of activity after 65, or more than 20, for mapping this uncharted transition territory. Go Magellans. A word that often comes up when asked to describe the experience of the aging process is diminishment. The time left is shrinking. We want to take full advantage of it, but all systems are not as go as they used to be. Something we now must actively factor in when planning a day, a hike, a vacation, or climbing the stairs. If only we could stop the clock. Some think they can. Modern day Magellans of a different ilk are taking a page from the hibernating peepers, placing their dead human bodies in cryopreservation, liquid nitrogen, or in biostasis, as it's called. Futuristic scientists speculate they can reverse death by preserving the brain and 3D printing a new body once that technology gets up to speed. Once that technology is up to speed is the operative phrase in this concept. Meanwhile, hundreds of bodies lie in frigid waiting around the world. But without such draconian measures, and instead celebrated for the good, bad, and ugly of what it is, this phase of life is as rich, complex, and dynamic as any before. It's definitely not easy or peasy. It requires we cope and adapt in ways we never imagined. But when has that not been true? When has that not been true? Rather than retiring into the background, maybe the structure and expectation of this phase is to take the center of this age's stage with all the vitality, creativity, and contentment we can muster. The Spanish got it right. Their word for retirement is jubilación. If you say jubilation fast 10 times, it almost starts to sound like ribbit. Well, kind of, but you take my meaning. Okay, so I don't know, should I read something goofy or something? I'll read something short and goofy, and then I'll read the poem that I gave to the session, the joint session, the opening the 83rd legislative session. What's amazing to me is that they don't ask to see these poems before I show up. Whether it's the Oregon business something, and there are 1,200 people, or the senators and the legislators, and are any of you here? I don't know.
You appear trustworthy.
By the way, parenthetically, I just want to say that a young poet from Redmond made it to the 10, 11, 9 finalists of Poetry Out Loud this year. She didn't win, but she was there, got through 3 poems that both performed and interpreted, and after a whole series of getting to that point, it's quite an impressive process. So yay, Redmond. Okay, here's one that's goofy, but it kind of explains a lot. Cirque. Arms extended overhead, wearing a purple sequined leotard, I stand on a ledge high above the crowd. They roll their eyes, crane their necks back to see what flare, a jackknife, a pirouette midair, as I prepare to jump to my life. Some yell, don't! The fear of seizing the day catching in their throats. Others clap and cheer. I chalk my hands, grab the bar, hang from my knees, then let go. Flying spread eagle through the air, I reach the returning trapeze. Bless you. True, I have suffered falls, errors in attention and timing, that's all. But ask me and I'll do it again. Swallow fire, be sawed in two, or put my head inside the mouth of every child and lover. Okay, so I thought what would be really cool would be to introduce the legislature to the notion of a koan, right? A riddle. Yes, so you're nodding in recognition. It's difficult to define, which is exactly what it is. There's a koan for you right there. Oh, good. This is fun. But anyway, this is titled A Koan to Action.
How do you spell
Koan.
it?
Yeah, you'll have, is it faster to Chicago or by bus? That's not sort of in the Buddhist sense of a koan, but it's an example of a koan. A koan to action. and then we'll go to questions. And thank you all for your attention. Did you know the Owyhee Canyon, well, I'll start again. Did you know the Owyhee Canyon lands are 16 million years deep? That millennia ago, people lived on the verdant shores of the high desert's inland sea? If I do the numbers in relative terms, our life will have only lasted an hour. That makes this moment paramount, all you senators and representatives. We, the citizens of Oregon, need you to know that you don't know what you don't know, to know what you do. If whistles and bells are the distraction, here's a suggestion in the form of a question. When's the last time you were lost on purpose somewhere in the middle of nowhere, where no sign of humankind was visible, silence was tangible, where the word for tree might still be landholder, or for salmon, humans with eternal life, where the symphony of trills, bugles, and howls quelled the tyranny of your thoughts? The desert's grandeur reminds us of our small stature. There we're dwarfed by mountains that walk across desiccated lake beds. We're awed by ghost-like alkaline twisters that trade colors and places with the wind. There we're extended the bigger invitation, whispered in words that mean the same thing to everyone. I salute you, captains of this kinship, tending in equal measure to bounty and lack as you journey from county to rotunda and back. And as you go, somehow withstanding the centrifugal forces that would rend what binds us. How do you do it? How to do it? How? Go to the desert, find 4 roads that run side by side, and choose the middle one. Thank you. So, oh, I know, before I forget, I wanted to mention that, if it doesn't happen this year, I'll write a better grant next year. I just got caught off guard, but the Academy of American Poets offers a grant to Poets Laureate for a project. And, as I say, if it doesn't happen this year, I'll have more time to get matching funds and all that good stuff that sort of greases the wheel. But I had these ideas about creating a website, and poets could I sort of that poetry box idea, put a poem in a poetry box. There's a telepoem that Oregon Humanities runs right now, by the way, that you can put your poems, recite your poems into on their website. That seemed a little like that. And I thought, well, what about a poetry? Well, no, my daughter said, Mom, every single elementary grade school teacher has a poetry during April month on the bulletin board, and it's not going to be a new concept. Okay. And she pointed out, why would you be creating something that required an interest in poetry already? Why, how can you get poetry, and how can we get any kind of writing, but in this case, poetry, in front of people who didn't know they wanted it? So I'm thinking about 3 things. One, and you all can help with this one, let your representatives know and the Oregon Arts Commission know that it is not okay that when they send out a request for artists' proposals for the 1% for Art program in Oregon, they don't include poets. Now, sometimes visual artists or 3-dimensional artists will incorporate a token word or 2 on their piece, but they have this massive list who's kept up to date. Poets should be on that list. They just should be. And if funding is going to be limited, I hate to say this, but it is a slightly more affordable solution for stopping people in their tracks and reminding them they're human, inscribed on a wall, on a tile on the floor. The bathrooms. Really? So that's one. 1% for art, go to poetry. There are big projects going on all over the place. Public Works in Bend is building a great big giant project. I think it's probably too late for that one. Probably the 1% is already allocated, but yeah. So there's that. The other is wherever I go during this 2 years, I'm whether I get the grant or not, I'm going to put it in a book. I want the writing of these folks, young and old, to see their work. But then what I want to do is get a whole bunch, but they can't be plastic, so I'm not sure what they'll be made out of. Little stands that can be left in those communities, and maybe, you know, the poet's name at the bottom is someone, the person sitting in that cafe or that cafeteria in a school or at that church center knows, because that's how they'll be distributed back to the community. Okay, so that's three things: the stands, how we're going to get them out there, the book itself, and then this advocacy for 1% for art. If you can think of any other ways to sort of kind of ambush people into loving poetry, let me know. So that was what I wanted to tell you about, and also about the young woman in Redmond whose name escapes me right now, but it would be on the Oregon Arts Commission or the Poetry Out Loud site. So what can I tell you? Any questions at all?
Have you always lived in Central Oregon?
No, I was born in Massachusetts.
Oh, where?
Well, I was born in Boston.
Boston.
Yeah. And the Cliff Notes version of a slightly more complicated story is I married a fellow New Englander. We went to Montana to ranch, and then we ranched in the high desert for close to 3 decades. And now I'm a town. But in my time here, some of you weren't here, probably even moved here since it existed, but the Nature of Words was a literary festival that went on for 13 years. And then it morphed into the Waterston Prize. And that's just celebrated its 10th anniversary. It is now a program of the museums. So those of you writing fiction about deserts anywhere in the world, check it out. And it can be a desiccated reef. You know, a dead reef is a desert of sorts, right? So I want people to think big about how we can define desert. And it can be a desert of the soul. I mean, you know, so yeah. Yes.
When did you start writing poetry? Has it been a long time?
It has been a long time. I was interviewed yesterday and was asked that question, sort of, what was the first poem I wrote? And I remembered that I tried to write a poem about a soap bubble that was really excited about being alive, and then it popped. And that's kind of grim too, but anyway, actually it's pretty real. But the poem didn't have much more success than the bubble, but it was a start.
So it's been since a teenager, or?
Yeah. In high school, I was in an all-girls Episcopalian boarding school way north of New Hampshire. And Robert Frost lived way north of New Hampshire, so he came by more than once. That was pretty special. And then I had that amazing English teacher, right? So many of us have a teacher that really encouraged. So that was great. But yeah. But also prose and journalistic writing. Yeah.
You gave us some clues, but what does a day in the life of a poet laureate look like?
Ellie, can you kind of repeat the questions, because the people.
Okay,
can
sorry.
only hear you.
Okay, sorry. What does a day in the life of a poet laureate look like? Did all of you hear the story about the soap bubble? Oh, I was gonna save you from the fact that they pop. But anyway, a day in the life of the poet laureate, let me just say that, I was just in Salem for Poetry Out Loud. The day before that, I was in Dallas, Oregon to lead a workshop and give a presentation. Came back, have this great opportunity right here in Bend, and I leave in 2 days for 4 days in Union and Wallowa counties back. And April is here, and it is Poetry Month. So I am all over the place. It sounds like a lot, but then there'll be some, I can orchestrate it. I'm figuring that out. So I'll have some time without commitments most of May. So the process is that these requests for appearances come through sort of the government, basically, and appear on my emails. And so then I answer them and copy the answers back to Oregon Humanities or whomever, so they can keep track of what's going on. And it's really hard to say no because you see the appetite and the interest and the curiosity. Obviously, the Valley is well schooled in what it is to have a poet laureate, and the literary community there is vast. So, but you know, Condon or the Crooked River Roundup, are you kidding? Or I was out in fields running a workshop during April. I'll be 4 days with the Harney County Bird Festival, the Harney County Writers Guild, and Harney County something else, all in a period of 4 days or so. So it couldn't be more varied, more fun, and I have to be careful because as much as I like to think as 40, I ain't. And there's some people here who think 40 sounds old. So. Anyway, thanks for that question. But I do want to add that I couldn't be more lucky to be able to make my life in this way, in a place that inspires me, doing something that inspires me. And I just want to say, this gentleman in the front row has, I don't know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears or something, but Central Oregon Writers Guild is rocking it. Rocking it. Thanks to your leadership, Mike. Yeah.
The young lady that finished ninth in the as a contestant, what was the contest?
Okay, so Poetry Out Loud is a national contest. States, they field, each state holds their own competition that winnows it down to a runner-up and a finalist. They have a book that's provided to the high schools that they can select poems from that they have to memorize and perform. And they have to represent that poem in a way that they clearly understand it, and in a way that has such kind of a familiarity in their presentation that it's as though it were their own poem. Now, some of them, are Edna St. Vincent Millay, or you name it. Some of them, so some of these, the poems in this book that they can choose from are really antiquated, I would think, from the perspective of these young people. Some not so much. And I think they may, I don't know for sure, they may be able to choose poems or recommend other poems. So that's what I was witnessing, was the 9 finalists reading their poem. That group got narrowed down a little bit. Then they read another poem. That group got narrowed down. Then a final, very small group read a 3rd poem. And then there were 2 left. And the winner goes to Washington, D.C., where all the other state winners congregate for the final, it's like a spelling, bee. It's like the spelling. Bee. Yeah.
The woman from Redmond was Ariana Morris.
Ariana Morris. I don't know if there are any Redmondites here, but yeah, she did a fine job. It's just heartbreaking that everybody, can't win, but whatever.
I have a question online from Kathy. She wants to know what your most favorite poem is that you've written and why.
Well, I will say that that Cirque one I turn to often just to remember how incaution sometimes isn't a bad recipe. But that's sort of justifying how I've approached things rather than it's proof. I mean, it's anyway. So I do like that poem. I don't know, I sort of fall in love. I love Static right now. I really do like it. It was a difficult poem to wrangle, to get, but I like it. Thank her for that. Thank you. Are you hearing me out there? Yep.
So I had a suggestion to add to your trilogy of ideas,
Agreed.
and that is to make poetry visible. And a few decades ago, I was the project manager for the poetry buses in Seattle. And I was also a bus driver. So it was really lovely to go on those buses and see the poems up there. They were printed out on the placards and they replaced the advertising. But I think somehow to make the poems visual.
Yeah.
So that people can see them.
Exactly.
And I don't know how that is, but from experience, I think it was very effective.
And Portland had that same program project going for quite a long time. But yes, absolutely. What could be better than being on a bus or a trolley and having a poem to read?
In a community center on a.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know on the streets of Madrid, they actually carved it into the bricks.
Yeah.
So when you walk up boardwalk, you are reading as you go.
Think how beautiful that is.
Ashland has poetry on the streets.
Ashland.
Yeah, they have a lot. They have a
Yes.
lot there.
Yeah.
In the meander and read it all.
How wonderful. Well, we need to take a page from these other communities and kind of, carry.
Words like the Vermicelli.
Yeah.
Words.
Sure. Back in the back row.
Would you be able to describe your creative process? Your multiple creative processes?
I think it's pretty uniformly that, oh, I'm sorry. I'm trainable. The question was, could I describe my creative process? Any of you that are writing, if you were standing up here, you would get that question. It's sort of the number one question. And generally speaking, what I say and what I hear from most other writers is, and particularly as I age, it's really obvious to me that my brain is fresh in the morning. And I don't know how many of you have suffered through the artist's way, have actually done it. But again, that sort of morning pages and then kind of getting rid of the garbage and then having a really open creative mind. Kim Stafford reinforced this when he was down with us. And I want to say too, that his wife, Perrin Kearns, who is a fabulous lyric essayist, was also on the faculty with us too. And they both nodded in agreement that time of day. I just think it's a discipline and it's hard because the mornings we want to kind of relax. There are a couple of word games on our phone. You don't want to just go so fast because you have to be at work pretty soon. But if you can possibly build that, just even if you just tack the idea down, it's sort of like getting that firefly in the jar to come back to later. I mean, if you're working at a full-time job, and try to build it a little bit more then. But if you have time in the morning, take it. Yeah.
When my kids were little, we had like firefly in the jar. We actually had the jar and the little
pad of paper and they would write with their, well, my son uses crayon and my daughter would use her pen. And if they had something they wanted to think about later, but didn't have time, they'd jot on the piece of paper, put it in the jar, and then that night before they went to bed, they pulled one out.
You
and
get the
we
Mother of the
would
Year
talk.
award.
So we would talk about it because my kids were both one was they both were dyslexic and one had dysgraphia. So it was hard for him to write. And so we would sit and she would share her tidbit and then he would share, and they each had their own little jars with their names on them and they would pull out just so, because you get busy and it was just like, or 1 second, basically, okay, do you have your thought? Write it down, put it in the jar, and then we go to school or whatever, just so, and night before bed, we would do that, just because we didn't do a lot of the kids didn't have cell phones till they were in high school, they only had short amount of computer, just because that was the trend when my kids was the whole.
Yeah.
More babysitters that were electronic than actual humans that was kind of a trend then, big TV was always like, go with the babysitter, but then you had the computers and you had
Yeah.
phones and you had, and because of their learning disabilities, we had to curtail that because it was too much stimulation. And so that's what we would
Right,
do. We would
right.
discuss and I never thought of calling fireflies in a jar, but that's exactly perfect what it was. We put our little ideas and things.
That's
in
just
jars,
fantastic what you did.
and it was just a few minutes, because I mean, they were little, they didn't get to big, long discussions.
Well, I was born before television existed and computers, never mind cell phones. Then the biggest dispute my parents had was my father wasn't gonna allow television in the house. He got away with that for a while, but he paid. So ultimately, I was rushing to the neighbors to watch Howdy Doody.
Yeah, yeah.
The family was falling apart. Not really, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so really,
So, I mean,
kudos to
that's
you.
kind of a cool idea, and I remember I was just trying to think of a quick way that they could just jot down, even if it was just one word that would trigger.
well, and the other thing is to string them all together at some point at the end of the week and they become a poem.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback on the process question because I haven't written poetry, but I'm thinking in the morning pages instead of just writing. Do you, in your process, do you set a production schedule? I mean, it seems so. Poetry seems much more like painting.
It depends on, sorry, the question is, a little bit more about my process and do I have a production schedule or what about the fact that poetry is a little bit more like painting? I work best with deadlines. So I create them one way or another and make myself miserable, but it does keep my butt in the chair. And so and I'll tell you, who's the genius of this is here, Carol Barrett. I don't know anybody who gets her poems more out in the world, who figures out what competitions are when, who shares those opportunities with others, who shows up at every single thing everybody else does. So I've often thought, I'm just gonna call Carol and ask her how she does it. But whether you're trying to put a chapbook together, you give yourself a deadline because you see there's a chapbook competition coming up, or there's an anthology that you saw advertised in Poets and Writers, and you think you have a poem already written that you're going to massage a little bit, or you want to write one for the theme of that anthology. Those are the kinds of things that kind of help. And yeah, then those paintings, those poem paintings that you describe, have a place too. They can be in a file just as they are. I mean, you can call the book gouache or whatever it's called, right? I mean, or pastels, or I don't know, but so nothing's wasted. I think the thing is to just be so into word choice and cadence and the yumminess. It really is. I need to get out more often. I don't mean on the road, but I just mean because what was it? I often mention this about Ted Kooser saying, a former U.S. poet laureate and just a fabulous poet, that he made, 800 word choices for a 7-line poem. So there are lots and lots of things. I think too, that what I love to do myself, for myself, but also in workshops are various language strengthening things, like changing every word out for the opposite. That's something that Irene uses a lot. Or changing every word out for something that means the same thing, but is a different word choice. Or, so that you're stretching the language a bit. You're putting different, surfaces against each other and seeing how they do. Because we have our way of speaking, and it's fun to expand that and enrich it. Yeah.
You write poetry and prose. How do you determine when something wants to be a poem versus when it wants to be a flash piece or it wants to be a longer form essay, or do you kind of keep those two worlds separate just naturally?
Right now, the question was. How do I keep my poetry and prose? It's like charades over poetry and prose writing separate. I do this thing once a month for the source. And so that is a prose deadline. And some of those could be a lot bigger. Some of those will at some point be a lot bigger. I have many, I'd say things occur to me, they just sort of show up in a certain way, but it's hard for me to answer that question because with this column on aging and ageism or whatever, I'm plucking ideas for that, right? And then other things come to me that are just, they feel like a gift, right? They just align, it just feels like a gift. The main thing is don't not write those down. The worst of it is what you don't return to, what wants you to write a poem about it. It's how do you explain that little line that you're not going to go back to? I'm really sorry. It's so beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you know how much editing would?
Well, this is the great thing about being in a writing or poetry group. They'll help you know that. But make sure make sure you're with people of sort of similar ambition and skill. But there are many, many ways to organize a group like that. But otherwise, I strongly recommend reading out loud because you'll hear it. You'll hear it. And I don't know if all the poets in the room would agree with this, but there's one theory that if the line break, if it's basically free verse, the line break, for me anyway, I like it to sort of be like the edge of something and it's resolved at the beginning of the next line. So the reader's constantly being pulled through. So if it gets a little flabby at the end of the line, like with a preposition or I don't know, yeah, so you'll pick up on that. But reading out loud to yourself is a really good way to edit, I think, for me. Yeah. And don't over edit, don't kill the messenger or shoot the messenger. But yeah. Most of what we work on does benefit from some editing.
Doc online wants to know, with your responsibilities as poet laureate, how are you managing to keep inspired and engaged in writing?
Doc, is that you? Is that my buddy Doc? Anyway, hi if it is. Well, hi anyway. So,
Yes, he says. It's your buddy Doc.
So I've had to. I mean, how do I? I'm not sure, but I've had to. I mean, I've made a promise to myself that if I'm asked to give a poem, read a poem at anything during my tenure, it will be a new piece. It'll be a new poem. That puts my foot to the fire, let me tell you. And you know, some poets get a poem more readily than I do. I really, I have it and then I overwork it and then I have to pull it all apart again. And that's what all these prompts and everything that we do in these workshops are useful for. They really, really are. It isn't just to keep you entertained in a workshop. So Doc, that's one way that I am. And then by virtue of the fact that I'm really building walls around the month of May, I'm hoping to get a lot of writing done that month, just my own stuff. But as I say, deadlines and a little bit of pressure is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. And the notion of being, you know, a room like this, listening to all your blah, blah. Okay.
So do you keep a notebook where you just jot down an idea when you have one so that you can come back to it?
Yeah.
To tell the folks at home what you're nodding about.
People online didn't know I was nodding. There could have been no, oh, they do?
Camera.
We're gonna, Mike and I will soon be at the comedy. The Tower Theatre.
Thursday night, folks.
But the question was, do I write down ideas when I have them in a little notebook? And I nodded. I think that should be all we do.
One more question for Helen?
I'm curious, you've been in this position now for 6 months. And you have a year and a half to go. But I'm really curious, 2 questions, and I'll make them brief. What has surprised you the most thus far? And then with the remaining months, what do you hope to accomplish?
The questions are, what has surprised me most during the first 6 months of being poet laureate? And what ideas, plans might I have for the second year and a half of the tenure of this position? Now, I'm going to be honest. I mean, I thought I was hot shit when I got the call to be poet laureate. I mean, I thought it would be obvious to people. I wouldn't have to say anything. I just oozed it. I was totally on this bender, this ego bender. Well, not a whole lot changed. And suddenly there were this tsunami of requests. And you know, so I quickly realized that, first of all, the health of my ego was no surprise, but it's been regulated now since, for sure. And the other surprise has been, as I say, the appetite. Really. I don't know what I thought. I did make a point of speaking to all the living former poets laureate, Lawson Anata, Elizabeth Woody, Kim Stafford, Lion Peterson, Anis Johnny, who was just here with author. Any of you go hear him? Good, yeah. I just didn't, I must not have asked the right questions because I didn't really get what this was going to be like. But I do think there's something weird about the title that gives people a chance to invite someone who will talk about something that's not really thought about much in their community. That's why places like Bayville, Condon, they're all coming up. I'll be spending a number of days in the Astoria area. Yeah. So that's not a perfect answer. The year and a half ahead, I really hope to get this project that I described earlier going and really have something to show for people to hold or do or see this sort of 1% and the ideas that Kip had and ways to display poems throughout the state. I just can't imagine that that's not something I'll really lean into. Nice. Thank you all
Thank you.
very much.
Oh, thank you, Mike, for your patience.
Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you folks at home. Those of us who are here, there's coffee and cookies and other cool stuff and people to talk to, and Ellen will stick around and one.
Did you want to mention the anthology?
Oh, I did want to mention the anthology. Thank you. Appreciate that. 2025 Central Oregon Writers Guild Anthology. Can I do the screen again, Becky? Becca? 2022 or 2025 Central Oregon Writers Guild Anthology. We're going to start taking submissions to the anthology. It's open now, I believe. I think I set it up right. If it's not, somebody email me and let me know. It's on our website. There's a specific page called Member Anthology. We're taking prose, fiction and nonfiction, and poetry. I think the prose limit is 2,500 words. Poetry limit is 2 pages. We're taking 1 submission per person. Let's see here. So that if you click on the link to the anthology, all the information is here. You can submit via jot form. There's a $10 fee. It's all pretty self-explanatory. I'll talk more about it again next month, but it's open until May 31st. So, does anyone have any questions about it offhand here? Yeah.
I don't have a question about that per se, but what is the amount for the annual dues?
The annual dues are $25. Yeah, which is virtually free.
I see it as the last thing, only original.
Yeah, original unpublished work, no AI. You need to be a member. We want you to submit a bio, a 40-word bio. It's all listed in here. Again, if anyone has any questions about anything, email us at Central Oregon Writers Guild @gmail.com. Okay, we're looking forward to reading your stuff. All right, so party on. Oh, one more thing I want to talk about. Sorry. We're doing a weekly quiet writing thing here at the library upstairs in the Hutchinson room. Tuesdays from 9:30 to 11 o'clock. Great. If you want to just get away and have a quiet place to write for an hour and a half. We talk for a little bit at the beginning, but then we just sit and write. And I know it really helps me because if I do it at home, I will play with the dog or get snacks or do laundry or whatever. I don't actually do laundry. Okay, thanks everyone. Today we only had 3. You know, we've had 1 week we had